But let's go ahead and get started with today's lecture. I'm Carrie Bourne. I'm from the Office of Continuing Education at UW-Whitewater, and we host the Fairhaven Lecture Series each semester. We usually give 10 to 12 lectures on a variety of topics. And this semester, we are joining UW-Whitewater in celebrating our sesquicentennial, which means we've been around for 150 years, and we thought there was no better way to sort of celebrate that than to highlight the faculty that really make UW-Whitewater the special place that it is. And this year, we're especially grateful, I guess, to have been restructured to include our UW-Rock County colleagues. So now we have our campus in Whitewater and our campus in Janesville, our UW-Rock County. And today we have our first faculty member from our UW-Rock County campus who will be presenting for us. And he is John Pruitt. He has been teaching English at UW-Rock County, UW-Whitewater at Rock County for 14 years. Although he's not a native of Wisconsin, he finds ways to introduce obscure Wisconsin authors to his students and the general public as part of their own cultural history. Otherwise, he's just a Southern guy still trying to figure out why people from Wisconsin talk so strangely. Please welcome John Pruitt.
Thank you. Testing this real quick. Everybody hear me all right? You're good? Okay. Before I get to my presentation, y'all do talk funny, by the way. Y'all do. It's true. I'd like a volunteer to read a poem for me if you can read this, so if you can see the screen all right. Would anybody like to read this? Because this is the poem that got me interested in this subject. Would anyone like to read it out loud? Yep.
Oh, Marion. Yes, can you use the microphone? Oh, yeah.
In the Library by Mildred Fish. I looked up from my book of rondels, the gray silhouette of a painter, at the gray silhouette of a painter against the many-paned windows. How like are we, I thought, two painters standing on a ledge, painting the millions of life's windows, never pressing close enough into the dark glass to peer within.
Round of applause for our reader, please. When I discovered this poem, I had to find out who wrote it, this Mildred Fish. And I discovered that she is a Wisconsin native. She's from Milwaukee. And she got degrees at UW-Madison. She taught at what was then the Milwaukee State Normal School. And then she went to Germany and became a freedom fighter during Nazi Germany. And I thought, this is the coolest thing I've seen in quite a while. And why have I not heard of her? I have a PhD in literature. Why have I not heard of her? And this is what got me most interested in this subject. Like it was said to you, I've been here just since 2004. I knew very little Wisconsin authors. I knew some. I've heard of this Sterling North guy with his raccoon. I think when I was a child, I was reading his children's stories. Laura Ingalls Wilder, of course. I think I read Farmer Boy, I think was the only of her books that I read, because my parents wanted me to read the boy books and not the girl books, right? So I got Farmer Boy out of that. August Derleth I discovered when I got here, because the University of Wisconsin Colleges had a poetry contest for students named after August Derleth. And then Lorene Niedecker, I encountered her when I moved here as well, Justin Ford Atkinson, right? And there's a literary festival, I believe, in her name, still happening. Okay. And then I love this picture. Do y'all recognize that author? Do you recognize the handsome guy next to him? Okay. Who's the author? Who knows him? That is Michael Perry. I met him at a conference. Oh, it's been 7 or so years now, but I like that picture. It's something about it. And when I started to investigate some of these forgotten Wisconsin authors, like Mildred Fish, I was drawn to some books that exist on the subject already. So there are books written about these famous Wisconsin authors. of various years. And then on the far right, the Literary Heritage of Wisconsin, Volume 2, Part A. So there seems to be a pretty lengthy history. The issue that I found, though, was that it's really difficult to identify what it means to be a Wisconsin author. Does that mean lived here, born here, lived here, wrote about here, and died here? Very few did that. Okay. So, for example, some people consider Eudora Welty a Wisconsin author. She's from Mississippi. She's one of my people. Yeah, we sure do. We eat funny things, too. She went to UW-Madison, and then she went back to Mississippi. And I wonder, but you know what? She makes the list often of Wisconsin authors. I don't think she's written a bit about Wisconsin, though. Okay. Edna Ferber, you might know, Showboat, and others. But she didn't live here real long. She moved to the big city and became a dramatist. Do we count her? She's born here. What do you think? Does it count? Maybe. Orson Welles, born in Kenosha, didn't stay long, but he's still on those lists of Wisconsin authors. I didn't want to talk about people like that. I wanted to give you a stronger connection. So I was looking for people who, if they at least left Wisconsin, they at least still wrote about it and reminisced about it. So I've got a few authors here I want to introduce you to. Hopefully they're new to you, and there have been ways of bringing them back by republishing a lot of their work and also putting them online into the free domain. So if you have internet access and you have your Kindles and so on, you can quite often have access to these authors. And I think it's important to think about them. The first one is GLENWAY WESCOTT. He was born on a pig farm in Washington County. Any pig farmers? Any from Washington County? No? Okay. Okay. I discovered him because I have this interest in the American expatriate authors who went to Paris in the 1920s. And they were called the Lost Generation, right? And as an avid reader, he decided that being on a pig farm wasn't really his thing. So he abandoned the farm and he went to the University of Chicago, where he met famous writers. So poet Edgar Lee Masters, who wrote Spoon River Anthology, you might know that. Carl Sandburg, who wrote some of the best poems, early 20th century. And after that, he moved away to where everyone goes when they want to be a writer. He went to New York. When he was in New York, he published his first book called The Apple of the Eye. And this first novel, it begins his reflections on the rural Wisconsin of his childhood, but it also shows how much he really didn't care for it. It was a little bit too repressive for him, a little bit too puritanical. Okay, and in the early 20th century, he wanted something a little more robust and exciting. So he tried New York. New York was fun. But then he moved to Paris. Okay. And this is where he associated with some of the most famous American expatriate authors and artists, Gertrude Stein, Ernest Hemingway. He knew all of them. But for some reason, we've forgotten Westcott. Okay. So not an American writer, Pablo Picasso, right? But he was part of their coterie, part of Gertrude Stein's entourage in her salon. And F. Scott Fitzgerald, the problem was they didn't really like him. When he got to Paris, he started this first book, The Grandmothers. And I have a copy of it at home. I think UW Press has republished it, if you prefer paper copies. So any library can get it for you. He won the Harper Prize for it. This is 1927. And it's told from the perspective of a young man named Alwyn Tower, who leaves his family farm to live in Europe. So quasi-autobiographical, right? But at the same time, he's haunted by the memories of his long-dead family members whose lives were shattered by the Civil War. So it's a really interesting perspective of a young man living in the present but who's sort of haunted by the past. It makes it kind of a Gothic novel in a lot of interesting ways. This other book, Goodbye, Wisconsin, yeah, let me just read you a short excerpt from this. It's a collection of short stories about simple and idyllic living, but very isolating and morally repressive. And this comes from the book jacket of the first edition. Westcott wrote, "I should like to write a book about ideal people under ideal circumstances. No sort of undernourishment, no undereducation, nothing partial or frustrated, no need of variety or luxury. In short, no lack of anything which, according to its children, Wisconsin denies." He had pretty bad memories. The issue with him now in Paris was that, like I said, he was associating with Gertrude Stein and other famous writers. They didn't like him, though. Gertrude Stein said that he has a certain syrup, but it does not pour. And I thought, how wonderfully catty that is. I love this. She wrote that in the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, and I'd read it years ago, and I just forgot about that part. That's how he's overlooked, I think. But when he left Paris, he went to the New York and New Jersey area, and he continued writing, not about Wisconsin any longer, though. And but when he stopped writing, he did so many wonderful things, and I still don't understand why we've forgotten about him. He was elected to the American Academy Institute of Arts and Letters in 1947. He was their president for a few years. He became involved in UNESCO, which we still have. He served on the board of the New York Museum of Modern Art. All these wonderful things that he did. And he died in 1987. Died of a stroke. And then we forgot him. So we have to do something about that. Okay. Now the next author you might have heard of, Zona Gale. Oh, so she's not forgotten for you. She's just new to me. Is Zona Gale, is she new to any of you? Good, my job here is done. Good. But she interests me. Born in Portage, and her house is still there. It's a sort of museum, right? She was the first woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, 1921. But we've forgotten her for some reason, and that's a shame. Okay. She earned degrees at UW in Madison, and she became a journalist in Milwaukee. And just like Glenway Westcott, she moved away to where everybody wants to go to become a writer, which was New York, right? And there she was also a journalist. She wrote for a paper called the Evening Journal. And she also became very politically active in the women's movement. So when she started writing when she was in New York, she started with short stories. So Friendship Village and Friendship Village love stories. Idyllic, small town stories. And they're very good. They really, really are. But the more she became invested in social causes, those issues began to creep into her fiction. And she ended up changing her views about this idyllic village life, like in Portage, where she, like Glenway Westcott, thought it was a little too repressive, especially for women. And this possibly did stem from her political views because she did a lot of work with the La Follette family. She knew them very well. Very progressive family, right. This new strain of writing includes her two most famous works. And one is Miss Lulu Bett, and the other is Faint Perfume. And Lulu Bett was 1920, and that's what she wrote her play based on, that won the Pulitzer Prize. These are very satirical depictions of oppressive domesticity and female independence. And you see it because she became very politically active with the La Follettes in the National Women's Party. And she lobbied for Wisconsin equal rights law. and she became a member of the Lucy Stone League. And in 1923, she was appointed to the UW Board of Regents. And we don't remember, right? And this seat, she served there till her death in 1938. Okay. LULU BETT is still, it's on my bookshelf, so I know it's been published now. But Faint Perfume, I have not found it republished, but it's available in the free domain, the public domain online. Okay. Now, she had a really interesting influence on the next author. Do you know Marjorie Latimer? She had a very short life, but she was also born in Portage, and she kind of became Zona Gale's protege. So Marjorie Latimer wrote a story that was published in the newspaper, in the local Portage newspaper, and Zona Gale saw it and invited her over to meet the person who wrote the story. And Zona Gale made such a strong impact on Latimer that she left the University of Wisconsin, where she was a student, to follow her to where? New York, where everybody goes. She stayed there for only 1 year and returned to the university, where she started to associate with those crazy bohemian poets. Yeah, and you know what happens when you associate with bohemian poets, right? And she went back to New York with one. The most famous is named Kenneth Fearing. I don't know much about him, but he was a bad guy, from what I understand. He published regularly in the New Yorker and so on, but apparently he was a pretty bad influence on her. When she ended the relationship with him, she moved back to Portage. This is 1928. And that's when, this is interesting, she discovered that Zona Gale was engaged to marry a man named William Breeze the next day. And Marjorie hadn't been invited. So she felt insulted. Would you? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so she took it out on her in writing her first novel, We Are Incredible. It has not been republished at all, so I've not read it. I need to find it. Okay. But I can tell you what it's about. It's a caricature of Zona Gale. There's a woman named Hester Linden. She's a beautiful older woman who runs a sort of cult following out of her home and sort of seduces them to the extent that they almost die. This is your hand up, sir, for a question? Oh, I'm sorry. That's worse than what Gertrude Stein said about GLENWAY WESCOTT, right? Certain syrup that doesn't pour. Here we've got an older woman who's seducing people until they're almost dead. I got a kick out of it, you know, but I need to find this book now. She followed that with others. Her other famous one, it wasn't as well received, though. It was called This Is My Body. It was a very experimental novel. This is 1930, and it's a blend of fiction and memoir about a woman who goes to New York to become a writer. She moves from a small town and faces, you know, poverty and sexism and so on. Okay, but again, not as well received. But this book, We Are Incredible, I've got to find this book one day. It's a shame I don't like to read online. I'll bet it's online, but I just don't care to do that. In 1931, horrible picture, but all I could find. The man on the left is Gene Toomer, black man. Very big figure in the Harlem Renaissance. And his most famous work was a very long poem called Cain. They were married. Cain itself, though, it's about Southern Negro life, and it made his reputation overnight. And they got married in Wisconsin, and they moved to New Mexico, and then to an art colony in San Francisco. And interracial marriage, questionable at the time. And there was a journalist, in fact, who wrote an article about them, and he accused them of, and this is a quote, mongrelizing the white race. At this point, Latimer was pregnant, and she was pretty humiliated by that. And they moved back to Chicago, and in 1932 she died in childbirth. So she had a very short life. What were her dates? Yeah, she just 33 or so years old. And it makes me think of. I mean, she lived in an art colony. That's pretty neat. moving around. She and Zona Gale did make up. I should mention that to you. Zona Gale was in California for a bit, and they were able to get together, and they made up. She wrote some short stories. Nellie Bloom is one of the collections, and she wrote other short stories. I think those are the only novels, though. That's all that I've discovered. Okay. A couple others that are still pretty new to me, but you might have heard of them. Robert Gard, anyone? He was actually from Kansas, and this is where it gets kind of questionable because he's not a Wisconsin native, right? He was born in Kansas on a farm, 1910 or so, and his father was older. His father was 50 when Robert was born, okay? And most of the hard work, therefore, fell onto his shoulders on this farm. And if we read his semi-autobiography, it's not this one, it's called Coming Home to Wisconsin. There was an interesting story about how his father was going into the cornfields to smoke, and he followed him. And he's got his pipe, and he's looking up at the stars. And then he walks a little bit more to this tiny cemetery. And that's where he told Gard, his son, to look for the stranger. And that's all we got. Look for the stranger. It's kind of ominous, right? But that's what Gard did. He went searching for whatever this stranger might be. He worked on farms and on road construction gangs. And in the 30s, he saw what the Depression was doing to people. He saw that it had taken their livelihood. It had robbed their spirits. He said they looked kind of hollow-eyed from what the Depression had done to them, by just taking their spirits. He was also pretty naive growing up on the farm, so he ended up being robbed and beaten pretty badly. And then he found work with a widow who owned a farm, and she helped him out. And in the meantime, this is still in Kansas, he met a man named Alan Grafting, who was a university professor who discovered that Gard wanted to be a writer. He thought maybe the stranger was something in him, and that's something that he could discover through his writing. So he went to Cornell University in New York, and then finally he got a teaching job at UW-Madison. And this is 1945 or so. He was there for about 40 years, and he became a very prolific writer of Wisconsin folklore. I mean, interesting stuff. From what I understand, Wisconsin is My Doorstep is what he's known for. This was 1948. And a lot of tall tales and folklore, log skidding contests among lumberjacks. Has any of you done that? Log skidding? Anyone? Is that that's not log rolling. Is that different in the water? Is that different? What's that, sir? Log rolling is in the water. What's skidding? Log skidding? It's moving it from one spot to another. Oh. And they would have contests. The lumberjacks? Okay. I like it. There's another story he wrote. A woman from Wisconsin went to talk to Abraham Lincoln because she wanted better hospital conditions during the Civil War. And I thought that was pretty interesting. I guess there was a duel between Wisconsin and Iowa over cheese. I'm not going to doubt that at all. But these are some of the stories that he includes in Wisconsin is My Doorstep. So when he moved here, he really did a lot of reflection and apparently collected a lot of folklore. That sounds fascinating. Something about a hodag beast in Rhinelander? What is this? Tell me. I'll have to find it. The hodag. All right. Is it like what's the one in Mexico, the chupacabra? Is it like that? Yeah, kind of mythical, kind of. It's real. See, because I've also heard there's a werewolf near Milwaukee. Is that it? Okay. So you live in a scary place, too. You talk funny and you live in a scary place. But something else about Robert Gard is he started the Wisconsin Rural Writers, which was a forerunner to what's now, it's still in existence, the Wisconsin Regional Writers Association. They still meet. So I think, yeah, I mean, his legacy lives on then through that. And then finally, Clifford SIMAK, who was a science fiction author. Do you know him? I hadn't heard of him either until recently. He is from a place called Millville, which is near Prairie du Chien, I think. And he wrote a lot of short stories that were science fiction. And his best known do have Wisconsin connections. Way Station, which was published in 1963. There's a man named Enoch who was a survivor of the Civil War. And he lives a very reclusive life in a farmhouse. And he starts to make people a little suspicious because he looks about 30 years old, but it's 1964. And he's a survivor of the Civil War. So he starts to stand out. People get a little suspicious of this. And it turns out that this farmhouse is actually a way station for space travelers from other galaxies. And it's located in southwestern Wisconsin. And the other, the Goblin Reservation, it takes place on a university campus called Time University. And because of local landmarks that he mentions, it's determined that's probably the Madison campus. Yep. And then in this case, there's a caveman named Alley-Oop in it. We know Alley-Oop, right? And it turns out that part of Wisconsin has turned into this reservation for legendary creatures like banshees and trolls and goblins and things like that. So that's the sci-fi connection. And I think he's the last of the authors I've discovered, and I'd love to hear about more of them that I haven't mentioned yet. But I do think it's important for us to bring these authors back. Definitely. I mean, this week is the Wisconsin Book Festival in Madison, and I would love just to see them showcased there, and to get my students and the children, the grandchildren, and so on familiar with these books, just to be part of to be familiar with their cultural histories. I think that's very, very important. And now I'd like to see what questions you might have. As far as I know, but any library I know can get them for you.
Are you a Wisconsin author?
Let me think. Because I have published small memoirs, but not about living here. So not yet, but maybe. I'm going to work on that. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was pleased that you included Augie Derleth, but I don't think many people today read Augie Derleth.
Is that what do you think? Do we still right? Do we still read Derleth? So he went by Augie, and not August. Really, I didn't know that. Okay, no, that's good to know. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Oh, one back here, and then we'll come to you, ma'am.
How do you propose bringing these authors back?
There are editors now who are digging in the archives and republishing some of their work. So GLENWAY WESCOTT is being republished now, for example, and the UW Press is doing it too. And I think it's just talking and circulating it and getting people to read it maybe online, and then we can get them printed again. Because they're out of copyright.
Was there a question?
Yes,
over there?
right here.
Oh, right here. Okay.
When she mentioned August Derleth,
Mm-hmm.
it just reminded me, what about Hamlin Garland?
I know that name. Is he Minnesota? Garland. Is he? We're going to fight over him now. Wisconsin and Minnesota are going to fight over Garland. I do know that name.
Yeah. Did you?
Okay. I know I've heard his name, but I just can't place him.
Did you have another comment here? Okay. Yeah.
I'm not native here. Are there Whitewater authors?
Not that I found, but I'm sure there are. I have no doubt. Oh, she wrote about the Titanic, you said? Okay, Carol Goodwin. Okay. Okay.
Say that here? No, okay, no, okay.
They were able to get permission to exhume the body, so then they identified the baby.
Okay. I should look into forgotten Whitewater authors. And Janesville too, maybe like, counties, the couple counties. Because the Rock County campus also incorporates Greene County, a lot of Greene County students. So maybe I can work all of them into a bigger project like this. Yes, sir?
You work with any recent authors?
Do you mean, do I know them or do I introduce them to my students?
In your research?
Not too much. It's usually the dead people that interest me most. But because they can't talk back, right? When for one summer, I taught at the campus in Marshfield. There's a 2-year campus in Marshfield. And I asked the students to read one of Michael Perry's books, Population 485, which is his first. They didn't like it. And I loved it. I did. In fact, a friend of mine is training to be an EMT, and I said, you have to read this book. I mean, the chapter all about vomit, is worth it. It stands out, right? But the students in Marshfield said it was too familiar to them, because he's from Rice Lake, they thought, because it was about the farming and the cows and the trucks and so on. They wanted to read about what was not them, to have a new exposure. So they didn't really care for him, but I thought he's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, there's an author up in Rhinelander, Victoria Houston,
Okay.
who writes mysteries about Loon Lake, a fictional lake. But her hero is a retired dentist, and the heroine is a police officer of that. The stories are a little bit shallow, but the description of the characters and the area is very nice.
Somebody I worked with in English who retired not long ago wrote a book about Taliesin, and it was a mystery story. I can't remember his name. He retired 10 years ago, maybe. That's why. Frank Lloyd Wright and the Taliesin. It was all over National Public Radio. They were reading it on the. Oh, I can't remember. Maybe. On Chapter a Day. Yeah.
What about Stephen Ambrose?
I know his name, but has he been forgotten? Is an important question.
He's Whitewater, right? Right?
Is he Whitewater?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's a historian.
Okay. So I still have a lot of reading to do.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh.
I've come across his name several times. Yeah.
We have a bridge that goes nowhere, and then they dedicated the name. It's a viaduct over the highway, but then there was a dedication, and it's named for him.
Oh, okay.
It's named. If you're in a car, you can see it that it's named. They built this bridge, and they were going to develop the other side of it, and then that was when the crunch came with building and
I see.
everything. So this bridge goes nowhere. So everybody walks there, though. Walks on the.
Got it. Okay. No, a piece I'm working on now. It's not a fiction or memoir. It's a scholarly piece, but it's about how I was teaching my students the works of GLENWAY WESCOTT when I taught modern American literature last spring. We talked about a lot of the expatriate writers, and I wanted to talk about Westcott as part of them, and they'd never heard of him, but they'd heard of Hemingway and all the others, though. So one way is me getting other instructors, I think, to thinking about ways to incorporate those authors into their own curricula and get those wheels spinning, I think. It's just talking, a lot of talking. Lots and lots of talking.
Other questions? We can keep talking.
Okay. They have access to libraries here, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Yeah.
Better.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of libraries. And like I said, a lot of it is available online for free.
Did you have one more question here?
Oh, no, not at all.
Was Westcott equally disliked in the U.S. when he came back?
No, he was liked. When he moved to the New York and New Jersey area, when he came back from Paris, there were friends and family there. He lived on a farm, ironically, in New Jersey for quite a while. I think until he died.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Teach your students writing.
Yes. I don't teach creative writing. I teach expository.
Any
Every
other
day.
questions?
Wonderful library, and then ours is the Irving Young Library
Okay.
in town. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
And you can always get things on interlibrary loan and things. so-
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so I think Professor Pruitt will stay after if you'd like to chat with him a
Definitely,
little bit
definitely.
more. But otherwise, let's go ahead and thanking Dr. John
Great,
Pruitt
thank
for his
you. Thank you so
presentation today.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.